Right. Okay. Well, thanks very much to M365 Saturday Pune. It's great to be here. And again, thanks to the organizing team, Nandip, Smita, Keval, and Siddharth. It's great to be here. And it's the last session, so I guess save the best for the last. And so my session is about understanding Microsoft Teams, in particular around the security and compliance. And it's a huge topic, and it's obviously about what 50 odd minutes is obviously a lot to cover. So we're going to dive into some of the key aspects of it. But basically, there's about 25 security and compliance features, and they obviously keep growing anyway. So as an organization, depending on if you're small or large, it really depends how much you want to turn things on and how much of it is on by default. And maybe a few months or few weeks to months, you may want to turn things on in a separate way. So we look at some of those key features that we have around that. But those of you who don't know me, a bit about myself. I'm Chirag Patel. I work with Patel Consulting as a Microsoft 365 consultant here in London, UK. And I'm also a MVP in Office Apps and Services, MCT, and a few other things as well. So really just to kind of keep up to date with all the ever-changing landscape of M365. So try and keep up with the certifications there as well. But my journey kind of started around 20 years ago in SQL Server and VB6 desktop development, and then really kind of morphed into SharePoint on-premise and online and Office 365, and the rest of you know, especially the last 4 years around Microsoft Teams, pretty much taking over everything that we do. So kind of great to do that. And also I tend to organize M365 UK user group, which happens every month and runs around middle of Wednesday. So we had one just this week gone. So if you're able to join, then meetup.com/M365 UK is the URL to register for forthcoming events. And there's my details, techchirag.com. So mainly I tend to blog about the events that I speak at. So I pretty much share everything that I speak about, and including for this session, slides will be made available after the session as well. So you can get to those as well. In terms of, got to thank some of these people, the organizers of these community events, because without them, I wouldn't really be here in terms of the things I've learned over the years. And by all means, you may be familiar with some of these events that's happening around the world. So if you haven't, then do check those out. They're all linked, and all my slides are available on those events as well. So feel free to reach out on that. So what we're going to cover essentially around is generally cover the overview around the teams and how it kind of fits in with Microsoft 365 overall ecosystem, if you like. Look at the actual responsibilities in terms of who covers what areas and how to really kind of get started, or at least have that boost to push those kind of security and compliance work packages if and when things come about, but also being able to then look at your state of data as well. So you may have performed migrations from file share, or you kind of just going live with your tenant, or just general loose collaboration, if you like. So we can look at that as well in terms of what kind of things flag up. But also we will deep dive into some of the areas around the sensitivity labels compliance manager as well. So just to kind of give you a flavor of things to really kind of understand and how things can be done very quickly, and also being able to have control around the state of your compliance as well. So hopefully that kind of makes sense to you in terms of what we'll cover. So Teams itself, for sure, that's pretty much next to Outlook, is another application that's always open on our desktop, because that's where we do our mainly all of our collaboration, sharing, apps, everything else that we do. And so whilst it's a huge platform to even develop your applications or conduct internal or external collaboration, but you do have the backing of that security and compliance, which is not just unique to Microsoft Teams, but it's available in generally from Microsoft 365 space. So behind every team chat space you have, there is a SharePoint site, there's OneNote associated with that site, there's a mailbox, security group, etc., etc. And these are obviously some of those highlighted areas in terms of when you do create a team chat space, then what you get, and then you're able to obviously service that team further by adding things like the Power BI workspace or Dynamics, and be able to connect to other services on that particular group. But what's really the key point to remember here is that, and certainly I see this in all the organizations that I visit, is you may have SharePoint sites as well as Teams running in parallel, if you like, in terms of that if there is a content sprawl of your sites, and if this another team is existing which might do similar or same thing, then you end up having duplication of those sites if it's not managed properly. So it is worth bearing in mind that when you do go in your Teams admin center, which lists all your teams that your organization has, then behind that team there is every SharePoint site which can be accessed in the SharePoint admin. So we will look at that as well a bit later on. But yeah, just remember that. So behind that group, there is that ability to then have that secure guest access as well. But when you kind of, as far as the user is concerned, in terms of what they want to get done and be able to do their job, and as long as the relevant security, protection, everything else is in place, then you can kind of securely collaborate and be able to manage your information and documents across the various teams, as well as the various folks in and outside of the organization. But really kind of what the message here is that, once IT will press the buttons and they will make certain kind of decisions from an IT stance in terms of being able to implement, let's say, DLP, the data loss prevention, being able to make sure that some of the information doesn't go out of the organization, like credit card information or other sensitive data. But then you also have the other views from the business who wants to make sure that their data and the business as conducted is done in a secure and compliant way. Legal have their own stance. You got the security officers who will, security or compliance officers who will look things from their perspective. But then what really boils down to sometimes is that everybody looks up to IT to say, well, you look after Teams and Microsoft 365 and other systems in your organization, then you just go and implement that. And that just obviously doesn't really happen at all, because if you're a small organization and you don't have the luxury of all these resources, then you're going to struggle, obviously, in terms of how to get that implemented. So there are some tactical ways of kind of getting through that journey as well, some of the key tasks that you can do straight away. But obviously getting the buy-in from other perspectives and being able to raise those risks is the key part. And there are tools that can help you do that, to be able to deliver that. So we looked at about about 25, and this 23 listed here. Obviously, I'm not going to go in a greatest detail, but what I want to really highlight here is that by all means, not an exhaustive list. Some of those things can be implemented straight away. But really, if I look at this from a high-level perspective, you kind of really divide this into 3 areas in terms of the features you have available to be able to control your security and compliance. And really, first off, as that, if it's you as a team owner, as well as being able to then control the meetings, or even just having a meeting outside of your team itself, then you as an owner have that control and are responsible to make sure that what things happen in terms of recording or being able to set some of the meeting options to make sure that you comply for a particular type of meeting. So let's say if you have a board meeting, then perhaps you may want to lock the chats down before and after, if you like, and maybe just have that for just the meeting itself where the chat is enabled. So you as an owner, as a meeting owner, without the IT or security, can do that. And that's really kind of where the starting point is in terms of what you can do as a control. But then if you kind of step into like the admin perspective from a Teams administrator, then there are things that your Teams administrator can do to either allow or block those apps that you have available, of which there are about 900. And you may have even custom applications in your organization, but also you have then your other settings like controlling your messaging policies, meeting policies, and all those things inside your Teams admin center. So as a Teams administrator, and if that's the only area you look after, then that's pretty much all the control you have. But the remainder of the points you have here, like the multi-factor authentication or being able to control your devices and everything else, all that resides inside Microsoft 365 admin centers, which you have around, and there's about, I think, 12 or 15 of those, and in various places you're able to then control in terms of how you can control the teams itself. So you got the endpoint manager, which is around you're managing your devices, apps protection, and all those things. And you got the encryption side of things. So again, new features coming out where you're actually able to control the co-authoring documents if they're encrypted, as well as one-to-one white calls, but also sensitivity labels and information barriers to be able to separate the two teams in an organization who don't talk to each other for privacy and regulatory requirements. So you got all those things that you can implement, but not necessarily for day one. It may happen over a period of 3 months or 6 months, or as and when the needs arise. So there's a link over there you can have a look, and there's a descriptions behind each of these features, and then you can kind of it'll point you to the places where you can actually implement some of those things. So it can be overwhelming in terms of that you can see that these are the features available to you to implement and get that kind of hardened security, if you like. But the starting point always is those policies, because again, we see all the policies in organizations where you have the whole raft of like generic policies, if you like, for security and compliance. But if you get to the specifics of it, and yes, we know that MFA can be enabled, but again, what kind of groups you're going to target? Are you going to target specific teams, or you're going to target the whole organization, or maybe even the guests who access your tenant as well? So you got to have controls around that and really specify exactly what those are, instead of just going ahead and implementing those things. And so these are kind of, if you like, 10 or 11, and by all means, it's not a full list either. This can be a lot more, depending on your nature of the organization. But once this is spelled out to your security as well as your legal teams and everybody else who's involved, then implementing is only a small part of it, but at least you have the ownership around it, the process behind it in terms of who's responsible if things go wrong, who's going to monitor it if there are failed instances of those policies, and what you're going to do about it and who's going to do about that. So as long as that is documented behind each of these policies, then you're kind of really in a good place to be able to implement the remainder of your team's compliance features that we had a look. So hopefully this kind of also makes sense in terms of getting that implemented as well. So again, we'll look at that in detail as well in terms of the implementation side of things. And so just before I kind of go into the demo really, and this is the key part as well, because again, if you're a consultant who's kind of visiting organizations, and one of the part of the review you might do is to look at the security and compliance centers, and in particular the compliance manager. Around the compliance score, which is what it used to be called. So here you have a good kind of status of play in terms of what's in your tenant that's not implemented or not documented, and that kind of gives you a score to kind of give you an indication how strong or weak it is. And obviously the idea is not to get 100% to it, but obviously being able to then control and being able to delegate some of those key tasks who might be responsible to implement as part of your policy for those actions. So you have all those kind of in-scope services and controls that you can see that you can kind of implement. So we'll again look at that as well. And so I think, in fact, let's just jump to that now. So if I go into my demo. So if I first of all, if I go to my from an ownership perspective, if I go to my calendar here, and if I have as a user who's organized a meeting, so I've got a private meeting here, let's say in my local time in a couple of hours, then if I go into that meeting itself, then yes, but most of the time we just kind of organize the meeting, send off, and job done. But here I can come into my meeting options, and then within my meeting options, you can, as a user, then you can say, right, who can bypass the lobby, for example. So you can control, is it everyone, including guests and so on, or you may say, for example, who can present in this particular meeting. So in some organizations, you have a dedicated individual who might just do that, and you want to block everybody out. Or in this case, this event we're running right now in Teams would have gone through similar options like this as well. So for example, do you want the attendees to unmute themselves during the meeting? So you have that control from a meetings perspective as to what goes on, and if you want to even enable the chat or disable that. So it's a very good way, and this is probably a good one in meeting only. So if it's a kind of a really formal board meeting type thing, and if collaboration is very strict, that only happens in the closed doors environment, then you really want to control that as an in-meeting only chat as well. So you can save those options in that particular way. If I go into my particular team here, again, things that you can moderate, and with every team you get general channel, and then you can have your remainder of the channels, whether it's a project, topics that you might do. So if it's an architecture discussion here, or let's say build and deployment, then that's one of the channels I've got in my project team site. Then again, I think what you can do is I can actually manage some of the things in that channel. So do I want to moderate that channel? In this particular case, I don't want to. I can admire that free-flowing conversations that goes around that. Or do I want to kind of put controls around who can start the new post? So from a meetings and channel perspective, as a user who's got access to it as a team owner, then you can do all those things very easily. And then obviously you got your team settings itself, where you can manage your particular team, and then being able to then go into settings, as well as you're managing your security of the team, but also being able to control what can the members do, what can the guests do. So you have all those kind of granular controls in terms of who can do what. So again, as a team owner, that's your responsibility. So if anything goes inside that team, or the life of that team becomes so long, like a department team, then you got to have a plan in place in terms of governing those particular team controls. So again, that's the place you can go for each individual teams if you want to. So if I jump into my compliance manager, now compliance manager lives inside Microsoft 365 compliance center itself, and on the left hand side you got all the other solution and links and everything else, which we'll visit one or two of them in a minute. If I go into compliance manager, then this is the place I would go to and have a look in your organization if you're an administrator to see what's the state of play on that. So again, within this particular environment here that I have, so in this case, I've got, let me just minimize that. So I've got overall compliance score of 59%, tells me what the number of points achieved. Here I've got a set of improvement actions in terms of what's pending, how many points are there. Again, if I have various groups set up, if I'm a multinational organization, I can set up for various countries if I wanted to, and have assessments for those countries if I want to do that. But if I go into improvement actions, then within that I can see, again, this is going to list me a lot of actions in there. But if I pick kind of one of them here, so if I first of all, let's say if I can kind of filter by particular regulations, and there are some license implications on this. So if you want to have some specific regulation compliance on this, then you need to have E5 license for it. But you got data protection baseline in my case here, which I can filter all the actions concerning by that regulation itself. Or I can just pick my solutions, and my solutions will be across not just Microsoft 365 Teams, but also entire Azure space itself. So here I've got Microsoft Teams, and if I pick on that, then I'll probably just get one or two, I think, items listed in there for that particular item that's not assessed properly. So yeah, that's the one I get says set sensitivity labels in digital communication and collaboration tools. The good thing about this action is that once I click on it, it gives me an overview and the status around what's happening with that particular action. And then on the side, I have the very granular detail in terms of how to, first of all, implement. And if I was to implement that, I can set the status in terms of is it done or not, or is it planned? And I can pick the date for the implementation there as well. And then I have links going to the Microsoft Docs as well. So all the information that I need is in one place. And then as I implement, I can add my notes to it. So I don't really need Outlook or other systems or Excel, anything like that, or emails to be able to conduct and manage these pieces of work. But then I've got a few other tabs here, so I can test if I, well, like with every policy you want to test out, so I can at least kind of go in here and be able to set that up as well. This will light up if I set the implementation date on it. And then you got your standards. Again, what standards in terms of what controls relating to that compliance it relates to. So again, you have various kind of IDs, control IDs in here, which you can then refer to as well. So again, really makes sense for your compliance and security administrators there. And then any documents you generate as part of that as evidence or test results or anything like that, they can be uploaded here by attaching those documents there. So everything becomes very much packaged for each and every improvement actions you have inside your compliance manager. And that's a very good way to really manage and control your compliance from that perspective. So go back to Compliance Manager. Then if I kind of go down further, then I have my breakdowns here in terms of the score-wise, protect information, govern information. Again, this is not something that you can tailor or configure. It's kind of set up for you already, and then you can go into the relevant filters for those improvement actions there. It is worth mentioning that it's not a kind of a guarantee that if everything is 100%, let's say, then it's not really a guarantee that you're compliant. It's just basically a way to kind of manage your information there, but it does flag up if things are not set up as well. So for you to be able to evaluate and validate those differences. Okay. So the next part that I want to look at is being able to control what kind of information you can apply for your sensitivity. In particular, we look at the label side of things in terms of this has been obviously around for some time now, certainly from a files and emails perspective. But if you happen to have confidential information containing in a team or even its associated SharePoint site, then you're able to now classify that information for the entire team space or a SharePoint site. And really the key part here is the groups and sites. So groups, as we mentioned, for Microsoft 365 groups, which is what it relates to. So you're able to then control privacy and external sharing, which you were able to do and you're still able to do now anyways, but it's a lot more easier now instead of having to click to so many places to be able to get to it. And so we'll look at that as well in terms of how that works, and then being able to also control how we can really formalize that team creation or even a site creation to be able to control what value you get. But again, the labels you can have depends on your compliance side of things. So you may have a general label to kind of catch all type information, and then you may have highly confidential label that protects the very sensitive related data in there as well. So that kind of, again, helps out to kind of spell out in terms of where you can actually encrypt some of those files as well if you wanted to. To implement that, it's relatively straightforward in terms of having your labels and publish them is the one thing, but then there is no GUI for this part. So in terms of being able to enable that, the Microsoft Information Protection labels, you then have to be able to connect to the Azure AD and Exchange Online to basically enable that sync, if you like. So there's the PowerShell script which you can actually use to kind of try it out in your environment here. So that's something that I already set up for this environment that I have, and then being able to then demonstrate to yourself. Let's look at that. Excuse me. So if I go to information protection, so here I have my labels and policies, which again, for some of you will be familiar outside of Teams environment, and this obviously still relates to Teams as well anyway. So here I've got my 5 label policies. Confidential project is the one that I'm going to show, but then I've also got general policy and personal policies, depending on what those things does for you. But if I go into labels, and just to show you that the one that I've set up, so you can either create a label, but I'll probably show you the one that I've done already. So click on the confidential project. Come on. It's always the case when you're doing the demo. Let's just refresh that very quickly. Good, right. So edit the label and then kind of just step you through in terms of how that's been set up. So here I'm only interested for this particular label. I'm not interested by the files and emails. So it's just the groups and sites being able to control those privacy and access controls. And then I can, that part of the wizard is grayed out because I didn't select the files and emails. The next one is enabled for me, and there I've got high level options to see if I want to control the external sharing as well as being able to control if it's going to be for public or privacy type teams. And you can see here it says that for labeled teams and for Microsoft 365 groups. So any SharePoint sites, everything else that you have, it all becomes part of that. But then I've got a further option here, which is to control that external sharing as well as the conditional access settings around that for, in particular, to protect the labeled SharePoint sites. So here for this confidential project label, I'm saying that this label only gets used for the private team site and for nothing else. So it basically kind of locking down that you can't create other types of teams for that. So only the team owners can access this group and be able to also add members to that. But also I've unticked here where they let Microsoft 365 group, so team owners, they can't add people outside the organization as well. So I've locked that down from there. And then obviously this has kind of gone live recently. So here I have further, and this is the one that's really a powerful make. So it doesn't matter if I go 1 team or 100 teams. Once I choose this label, it's going to go and then protect that team and the SharePoint site from sharing externally. So here I've said only people in this organization can get to it. I could have gone further and say block access for external, which in this case is already blocked anyway, but I can control if I want to allow only web access. In this case, because it's just within the organization, so I've kind of left it to say have full access by accessing through the desktop apps and mobile apps. And then once I've kind of done that, then I can just go ahead and say that label, publish the policy or update the policy, run that PowerShell script to enable the Azure sync itself for the label. And then once I've done that, then I'm able to still use that. So I can go back and forth and make the change, tweak on that label policies itself. So if I go back to my teams, and then here I'll go and create my new team, create team from scratch. I can create from a template, which is again a few weeks, months old now, but I'll probably choose scratch. And then here I've got my sensitivity labels. So I've got 2 labels published. The one I'm interested in is the confidential project. And this is the one that kind of locks it down to say I can't create public or org-wide team based on that particular label. It's only private, and that's what it matters. So that was a control we saw earlier. Here I'll say create a M365 Pune, create the team. Good. I'll come back later and add the members if I want to, but simple as that. You can create your team. And then a couple of things to note here is that, first of all, it is a private team, but also it's a confidential project label that's applied to it. I can then kind of go into here, files, upload my file. So I've got a sample file work schedule here, for example, which I'll just go and update that. And then I'll open that up and share that out. I can again do all this in SharePoint if I wanted to. Yep, that's fine. And go into file, share that file, share with people. And I'll say I want to share that to a specific person. So I can say Chirag at m365uk.org. And as soon as I do that, it just picks that label up. So again, it didn't really work on just on that file level, but anything inside that team files, SharePoint files, it will pick up and just says you can't share that externally. And so therefore, I'm kind of stuck from that. So again, very quick way to kind of see how that works in terms of that label perspective. But if you look at from, and if you're a SharePoint admin, it can be a bit confusing because here the label overrides that. So if I go into my SharePoint admin center here, if I just quickly refresh that admin center, and again, the external sharing and guest access experience is separate between what you get in Microsoft 365 groups and in SharePoint. So they're both different models you have. And whenever you create your groups access, and if Teams in this case is enabled for me, so any groups that I create, by default, the guest sharing will be enabled and is on. But for SharePoint site, I can go and lock that down specifically if I wanted to. So if I go and pick my SharePoint site, M365 Saturday. Come on. Okay, don't know what's going on with that one. So if I go into date created, it's newer to older. Should have done that in the first place anyways. So if I go to my M365 Saturday site, and then here I've got policies, and then I've got external sharing. This site can't be shared externally. Now, by default, if I go into here and enable that to say new and existing guests, go in there, and then share that enable externally, even though my sensitivity label here is marked as confidential project. So that's going to try and update that. If I still go back, it's not going to try and let me do that because it's just going to put a lock against the whole thing there. So again, you're at the platform level, it will be different depending on how you set up. So if I go into my policies here, sharing, then again, as far as outside of that label is concerned, in general, for my entire SharePoint platform and all the sites, I've got everything here to enable default for anyone on the planet. If I share things to anybody, then I can do that. Same for OneDrive. But if I go into SharePoint and bring that down to say only bring that to say existing guests, then you can see OneDrive can't have overriding behavior of that. So again, I can control that at platform level. But once I'm kind of gone into my sites, I'm not going to say that change. But if I go into here and if I pick a particular site here, for example, business 2, as an argument's sake, go into policies, then I can still edit that particular site sharing and still make that specifically lock it down as well. So I still have granular control at the platform level, at the site level, and for the overall sensitivity label, I've got my label that controls external sharing as well as guest sharing all in one place to keep it inside that place. So number of ways of getting to that and bringing that kind of experiences together, but at the same time having the flexibility to be able to control what can be shared externally. So if I go back to my other side, that was loading very quickly. A newer folder. And you see that I tried to update that and it wouldn't do that at all because of that label that's overriding it. So hopefully that kind of makes sense in terms of that end-to-end point, if you like, and not having to worry about going in two different places to be able to control your guest access and external sharing. Okay, so back to slides very quickly. And so we had a look at that in terms of being able to protect your team's private and being able to block access outside. The next part to look at is the DLP. And again, this is still part of the Microsoft 365. If you want to be able to kind of control in terms of prevent that sharing out, Teams chat messages is the option to pick inside your DLP options. And obviously, in this case, is detecting those kind of credit card information that you might put there as a chat window as part of your business activities, and it'll pick that up and then being able to have that flagged and being able to then post specific education or policy tips around that. So again, I know there are a lot of sessions out there how to do the DLP, and it works exactly the same for your Microsoft Teams perspective. The main thing about the rules type is that it's and this is where it gets kind of really tricky, because once you do implement, depending on the accuracy that the percentages you might set, you probably end up tweaking quite a lot just to make sure you're getting the right results in the right way for all those chat window, for all those DLP rules that you have. And in terms of being able to then block, whether it's for inside the organization or outside, that's obviously one part of it. But the main part is being able to detect the accuracy of it, and that's where much of the effort goes into making sure that your DLP rules really work. And then being able to set up the alerts is one thing. So again, if we kind of go back to our policies, in terms of when you get the alert for the DLP, what do you do about it? Instead of collecting all those emails and then saying these are all flagged and then just reporting it, being able to monitor it in a way that you can actually perform the actions that users can understand more is another. So again, you can bring all that within the DLP alert side of things. We looked at the guest and external sharing side of things in terms of traditionally, this is how you would have gone about. So again, there's a switch for across the whole tenant if you do want to allow guest access to the sharing. So again, you can go into the Azure itself and being able to do that, but also being able to understand that if group owners can share or not. So you can have those switches locked as well. And then Microsoft Teams itself has got its own guest access in Teams, which again is dependent on your Microsoft 365 tenant. So you can still control whether any teams can be shared externally. And then on the right-hand side, we had a quick look around SharePoint. So if we do have a SharePoint site that's not connected to Microsoft Teams, then all that external sharing can be done inside your SharePoint site itself, as we had a look earlier. And there's a link over there which constantly gets updated in terms of making sure you get a full picture of the dependencies when you do set up the guest access sharing for your collaboration spaces. The attack simulator training is kind of one of the newest way, if you like, to try it out. Again, this not necessarily directly related to Teams, but as Teams is being used constantly all the time, so it's a way to kind of really, again, from a training and adoption perspective, to kind of really educating the users to understand what the emails they get and if they click on it, and then being able to test all that out. So you can carry out that attack simulator training, being able to choose the various loads, if you like, around that to be able to manage the actual granularity of it in terms of who gets targeted for those training programs, and being able to then monitor and load that as well. So when you look at that perspective, then it's kind of a good way to capture that. So let's take a look at that very briefly, what that looks like. So the attack simulation training you have lives inside your security center. If I just fire that up. So if I come into my security center, then I'll go on the left-hand side, attack simulation training. So here I can do various simulations and payloads and all those things in order to set that up. So if I go into the simulation and launch a simulation, so I can then select the techniques in terms of what kind of links I want to be able to send out as an email, whether it's a malware attachment or credential harvest links and so forth, and or even just being able to change those URLs and being able to target the clicks on the URL. So maybe if I take that one there, give a name, drive URL, so name of the simulation, being able to then create the payload, or I can use this particular ones here. So I can maybe say receive deposit for ordered goods. So being able to then craft that email if like. So here's the one I get as an example email to say, this is the kind of email will go out to somebody in the organization. The description that it gives me, where is it coming from, all those things that I can do that. And then being able to see if there's any simulations launched around that. So if that was done, then I can at least monitor the click rate and whether our users genuinely kind of get trapped if they click on that. So if I then go ahead and click on next, then here I can target those users, whether it's everybody, and this might happen on a weekly or monthly, or maybe depending on the frequency of it and the type of initiative that you have that you want to kind of promote and educate. But in this case, I might say target only salespeople. If I go and say sales, then I can choose already there's a team called sales and marketing. I can target all those folks in that team, add that user group, and then go into here and then say, do I want to assign training for myself or the courses? If you have a training program around that, you can do all those things within here. And in this case, I'll just leave that as training experience. Due date, when the training should be due. So this program could go on for say like the next 7 days, and after 7 days after the simulation ends, then being able to target that training program for them. Again, when they click on it, they get kind of the email afterwards to say, it's okay, you're human, let's learn from this. So it's just kind of just teaching them that, it was a test as a exercise that was sent out. And you can then just go ahead and say, launch this simulation as soon as I'm done, or on a particular date. So I can say, do it now, and click next. And then I can send a test or just go ahead and submit that. Again, this is something, not necessarily from an IT perspective who would do that. They can if they wanted to, or you can have somebody who's got that hat on who can manage this program itself, because more often than not, implementing is one thing and being able to then have control around what things goes out, but the education training is another part that kind of gives that warm feeling, if you like, for the users that we're doing something about it. So hopefully that kind of makes sense in terms of how you can go about set up the attack simulation, and all that's within here as well. Right, okay, so we're nearly there. So in terms of kind of, if you look at the tasks, the high-level tasks, if you like, in terms of where do you start from? If you're already using Teams, and especially with the strange conditions of COVID-19 we've had over the last year, depending on which way, and these are the kind of the guidance from Microsoft in terms of how you can kind of go things and turn things on. So all the way from your identity devices, your information in SharePoint, Teams, emails, all the way to cloud app security, if you like. So it's kind of a good guidance there you have, and very well written as well. So do follow that in terms of having that. Again, conditional access is one part, and there are sessions of that can do that. I had a previous session before a few weeks ago, so you can check on my slide in terms of the configuration of how you can control what devices or what groups of people you can control to come via what methods of connecting to your teams, if you like. So that's kind of a good point to start from that. And then we kind of, as we looked at, when we set up a team for a specific project, if you like, and given that confidential project. So again, in terms of from a regulation perspective, you may want to divide your teams into these sort of areas, obviously the public team and what labels you might put. So again, this is kind of a simple chart, if you like, from Microsoft documentation as well, to be able to really control what things can be switched on. So again, for a public type team space, there you have owners and members can create private channels if it's that kind of organization wide, if you like, or you might go to all the way to the highly sensitive area where only owners can create private channels. New and existing guests or only people in the organization, depending on the team needs. So again, that governance piece you have, this will fit into that as well in terms of what level of protection you decide to put on your teams in order to manage those things. So you got all those things in there. So a few things that was announced a few weeks ago from Microsoft Ignite, and in particular, we mentioned the co-authoring experience, which has always been there, but now you'll be able to, kind of able to co-author an encrypted document as well, even with the label applied to it. So, which is a good thing. Safe links, just like you have in your emails, the URL scanner, if you like, which is in addition to your anti-spam and anti-malware. So that's coming later this month, or could be anytime soon. And then obviously from a meeting perspective, being able to disable attendee videos during the meetings, that's later this year. So again, you have all the links there as well. So there are far more other features that was announced as well. So do take a look at that, and then really kind of just keep control of your team's journey from a security perspective. And then further resources, you have, again, there's some of the features that I demonstrated there are subject to those licensing areas. So again, there's a good link around there in terms of giving you feature by feature what those licenses are. Being able to also, follow the roadmap is one thing, but making sure, a lot of the content that I see now in the security compliance space, lots of videos from Microsoft and things are constantly changing. So do take a look at the blog sites there as well, and all the articles. And then you have Joanne Klein, is really a strong advocate around security and compliance, as well as with SharePoint over the years. So I follow her blog all the time. So that's another good source of information to look at as well. But yeah, I appreciate there's a lot more in this session to fly by. I picked on only a few of those features that kind of to really understand the breadth and the depth of it, and obviously we looked at the sensitivity labels in much more detail there. But hopefully that session kind of has given you all the flavor of things to really kind of make sure you really understand the security and compliance that's involved in Microsoft Teams, and how it also touches Microsoft 365 aspect of it as well. So hope that was good. Thanks for having me. Thanks to all the sponsors and the organizing team, and my details are there. So if you do want to reach out now or later, feel free to drop me questions, suggestions, or feedback, and I'll take questions. But yeah, I just want to say thanks to Siddharth, Keval, Nandip, Smita for having me.
Okay.